Tommy Robinson. Just the name is enough to provoke a strong reaction by both his supporters and his critics. Regarded by many as a far-right extremist beyond redemption, the online agitator, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, has found a new following among Donald Trump's new right fan base. Fated by ex-owner Elon Musk and defended by respected academics including Jordan Peterson, the co-founder of the English Defence League has repositioned himself as the victim of an establishment conspiracy, a political prisoner silenced for exposing the brutality of the Pakistani rape gangs. In this Daily Tea deep dive, I go in search of the real Tommy Robinson to find out why some have come to regard this convicted criminal as some sort of latter-day folk hero. I also wanted to find out where his motivations really lie. Welcome to this Daily Tea special with me, Camilla Tominey. Now, we recorded this podcast earlier in the week, and since then, Tommy Robinson has lost a High Court challenge over the conditions of his imprisonment at HMP Woodhill in Milton Keynes. He's currently serving an 18-month sentence in solitary confinement after admitting to contempt of court for repeating false allegations against a Syrian refugee. Many of his supporters have suggested that he has been ill-treated, and his barristers have said that the conditions are damaging to his mental health. Our crime correspondent, Will Bolton, has been in the hearing for the last 2 days and sent us this report. And after that, you're going to hear the rest of this podcast.
So the High Court on Thursday, Tommy Robinson's lawyers requested he be allowed to bring a legal challenge over his segregation. They were essentially arguing that his continued isolation was a breach of his human rights. Robinson himself appeared at the hearing via video link, and the public gallery was packed with his supporters. Court was told that on the first day of his sentence, whilst he was being housed at HMP Belmarsh in London, Robinson had been put into isolation amid safety fears after telling officers he had a conflict with followers of Islam. He was subsequently moved to HMP Woodhill in Milton Keynes after the governor at Belmarsh received a large volume of abusive and racist emails and phone calls. Once at HMP Woodhill, where there's a significant population of Muslim prisoners, information and intelligence reports started to come in suggesting Robinson was essentially a marked man. There was one report that suggested a prisoner serving a life sentence would kill him if given the opportunity, and other reports that suggested inmates wanted to attack him for the notoriety it would give them. Robinson's lawyers said that his mental health had deteriorated dramatically since his incarceration and isolation, and they said that Robinson himself believed he was being kept in isolation for political reasons. The Ministry of Justice, who are opposing the legal challenge, said that was not the case. He was being kept there for his own safety and not because of his political beliefs. They said that he had a bespoke regime within the prison, he had unique privileges and was allowed significantly more visit time than any other prisoner. On Friday, Mr Justice Chamberlain, the judge in the case, ruled that Robinson's case was not arguable and he would not be allowed to proceed with his legal challenge. He said that the regime Robinson was on in the prison was very far removed from one that would violate his human rights. Robinson is due to be released from prison halfway through his sentence on July 26th.
And what's been interesting about Tommy Robinson is the more time he seems to have spent in prison and the more that he can argue that he's the victim of some kind of establishment plot to silence him, the stronger he seems to become on social media and other platforms. He's also been, let's be honest, massively aided by Elon Musk's support. So the multi-billionaire owner of X and Tesla has called for Robinson to be freed. He's claimed that he is in solitary confinement prison for, quotes, telling the truth. Robinson's representatives, of course, have leapt on this. It's a huge amount of support. Elon Musk has got literally millions of followers on a platform that he owns and has basically championed Robinson and projected his case without interviewing him, without doing any journalistic due diligence, has just basically shone a spotlight on this idea that he is in some way a victim of his circumstances. And that has gained him quite a lot of momentum. What in turn is interesting about Elon Musk's support is there's been lots of questions asked about who is funding Tommy Robinson, not least because he's the subject of so much legal action. Obviously, he's got solicitors' fees to pay. Robinson's representatives have even claimed that Musk himself has been paying his legal fees, even though Musk has refused to confirm that. Then we have a situation last summer and the Southport riots. Tommy Robinson actually isn't even in the country. He's on a sunbed on holiday in Cyprus. Yet because of his own online activity, he then gets blamed for fueling the riots, which of course were started by false rumours about who the Southport killer was, suggestions falsely that Axel Ruda Cabana was in fact an asylum seeker. He wasn't. He came from Cardiff and had been born there, albeit to Rwandan parents. It's then suggested that because of what he said about Southport and what he has previously said about Islamic extremism, his exposés of the Pakistani rape gangs, that he is somehow an enemy of the state and that he is being treated more harshly than anybody else in that kind of freedom of speech space. We get right-wing commentators like Jordan Peterson agreeing to interview Tommy Robinson.
But he's a tough character.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tommy Robinson came from the streets. It's like, don't mess with him. And he's super smart.
Yeah.
And he's not afraid. So, like, he's an intimidating character.
He even gained some support from right-wing journalists, very respected right-wing journalists, like Douglas Murray.
But if you're a Tommy Robinson character, if you grow up in Luton and you haven't had many advantages in life and you've had quite a lot of disadvantages, and you're white and working class, what are you allowed to do about this? What are you allowed to say about any of this? And the government, for decades now, has had the attitude, you're not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to say anything. You can't do anything because if you do, we'll call you a racist and we'll call you far right.
To understand the phenomenon of Tommy Robinson, you really do need to go back to his roots. First of all, Tommy Robinson isn't even his real name. He was born Stephen Christopher Yaxley-Lennon in the working-class town of Luton on the 27th of November 1982 to an Irish mum and an English dad. He studied aircraft engineering, earning a place on a highly competitive apprenticeship. Although he qualified in 2003 after 5 years of studying, he later lost his job when he was convicted of assaulting an off-duty police officer in a drunken argument for which he served 12 months in prison. As a young man, Yaxley-Lennon developed a reputation for football hooliganism and was part of the Luton Town football hooligan group, the MIGs, which stands for Men in Gear. He got the alias Tommy Robinson from a prominent member of that group. Then in 2009, an event happened that would lead him to create the English Defence League, or EDL. Now, many regard the EDL as being a purely Islamophobic group that was basically formed out of a hatred towards Muslims. Others will argue that all the EDL was trying to do was expose Islamic extremism, making the point that even people of colour were members. I went back to Luton, the home of the EDL, to speak to Peter Adams, a community mediator and peacemaker who was there when it all started.
The immediate piece was a homecoming parade of the Anglian regiment.
Yes.
Who'd been out in Iraq. Difficult tour. They were doing homecoming parade, as was the deal in those days, coming through the centre of Luton, along St George's Street here.
Yeah.
And they encountered, just up here, a protest by a small group of radical Muslims, Islam extremists, who were protesting against them. They were a well-known group in the town. Al-Muhajirun.
Yep.
They weren't big.
Linked
they were
to
prominent.
Anjan Chowdhury?
Yeah. And they were prominent in the town, but not dominant. They didn't represent the Muslim community by any means, but they were always out and about, and we saw them and we knew them.
Yeah. And
they knew that would be that march. They were protesting, and there are about 5,000 or so here, and they kicked off because they didn't like that small group.
Yes.
Just up here.
Yeah. When you say they, you mean
the crowd.
The crowd.
However, what was clear, as became clear later, was that some people were here especially because they anticipated there would be a problem.
Got it.
And the police shepherded them down to safety just over there by Lloyd's Bank, by the bread shop, and where they were safe in a sort of protected area that shepherded the extremist Muslims, and an angry crowd of around 250 people surrounded them, trying to get them. I think they would have killed them had they had a chance.
Wow.
But the police gradually contained the situation, and I found myself standing next door to one of the council officers who was keeping an eye on things, right by the bread shop, and we were watching gradually as the police gradually took control of the situation.
And what was the context of the kind of race relations in Luton at the time? We're in the late noughties, 9/11's happened 2001. How are the Muslim and white communities getting on at that point?
I think everybody was keeping in their place. It wasn't hot, but we knew that bubbling away under the surface there was a lot of discontent in the town, and really that just rose above the surface that day because of the homecoming parade. It became clear afterwards. I went home, and this was the first time I'd ever seen such a thing.
Yes.
I went home and just began searching on the internet. It was very clear there were a number of people who were trying to stir up, cause problems, cause an outburst.
And are you saying Tommy Robinson, Yaxley-Lennon, was
one
one of them?
I couldn't put his name to it, but there were people who did it.
And when did Tommy Robinson become prominent?
Tommy was behind a balaclava in those days. I prefer to call him Stephen Lennon, Stephen Yaxley-Lennon. Stephen was behind a balaclava in those days, but we became clear who it was over the next year before he became public. He only came out from behind the mask in October 2010, so a year and a bit later. But the EDL started in the summer of 2009. Right away from here, up in Birmingham initially, and then went all over the country, and eventually only came back to Luton in early 2011.
And when people turn around and say, look, the EDL was motivated by racism, it was motivated by anti-Muslim sentiment, is that right? What was the EDL, Peter?
It was a whole mix of factors. Stephen had grown up in a town. He had Muslim friends. He had black friends. He was quite used to a mixed multicultural community. But there was definitely a growing anti-Muslim extremism there, by which, when I say anti-Muslim extremism, anybody who looks traditional Muslim is in that fringe end. If you are prepared to totally integrate, drink beer with the rest of them, eat bacon with the rest of them, then you're acceptable. But basically, if you hold a religious lifestyle, if you're a fairly conservative Muslim, or indeed if you're not integrated.
Yes.
And they wanted people to fully integrate.
And that EDL sort of shtick about being representative of a lot of different cultures, I mean, was there an honesty to that? Did you have moderate Muslims involved, black people involved, other Asian people?
There was a bit of a very little fringe element of overlap into other communities, but most of them were typically white, middle-aged, young to middle-aged men who often were associated with football firms and so on, some not. But they drew in a number of people from the town. So in the biggest demo here in early 2011, there were sort of 5,000-6,000 people present.
Yes. And is it my right perception that this bubbles up at that period, and then to an extent, Yaxley-Lennon kind of retreats from the public eye?
He was very prominent both here and around the country with the EDL until he left the EDL in late 2013.
Why do we think he left?
There was some intervention went on by a group actually working a lot with the Muslim extremist community who gradually helped him leave. What his intention was, there was actually a number of court cases coming up against him. He went to prison early in 2014.
Yeah.
As I recall. I can't say exactly why, but it wasn't a change of heart as to intent, it was a change of heart as to strategy.
Why? And what tell me a bit more about that,
basically,
Peter.
to oppose what he regarded extremism, what I would call conservative Islam.
Got it. So he's then re-empowered, do we think, by the expose of the grooming gangs? I mean, how much credit...
That's already there. It's already there in
Yeah.
the narrative, even 2011, 12, 13. He had it in his own story. You learn a lot about him. An early telling of the story, his story, was in his delivery of a lecture at the Oxford Union in
Yeah.
early 2014.
Yeah.
And that documents some of his story, which many elements of which are true, or at least half the truth. We're not going to be divided. We as churches said it, the Muslim community said it, many people in town said it. We're going to hold the centre ground rather than be pulled apart. And we've created a space for people to join us in, really.
Yeah.
And actually we've done a lot of engagement across the community as churches. We know the Muslim community well. I mean, we're in the season of Ramadan. I've been to 4 iftars, fast-breaking meals already. We've got another 2 to come. You know, we get to know each other. We're doing more than in many places around the country because we've been forced together.
Wow. That's a really interesting sort of result of what had been extreme tensions in this town. But then as a self-committed centrist, presumably, just as you're worried about what could be described as far-right extremism, I presume you're also worried, as are some of your Muslim counterparts, about Islamic extremism.
And we together, because we've worked together, we've been able to challenge the extremes on all of our sides. I'm a centrist. I'm a radical centrist. I'm not content with the status quo.
Yeah.
I want to create much more engagement, much more interaction, much more working together, because that's the way as a town we're going to build a new future together.
But do you think there are elements of Islamic extremism still in this town?
They're contained enough they don't show their face. They're not as confident as they were back when Al-Muhajirun were publicly up there with a display twice a week.
Yeah.
Outside the sixth form college every week without fail on a particular day. They haven't got the same confidence to be there. We've dealt with it on the surface, and it takes a lot more guts to bring it to the surface than it ever used to.
And with the kind of endorsement that he's received from Elon Musk and his alignment to figures like Donald Trump and Andrew Tate, clearly there's an appetite there to spread his wings. I mean, do all roads for Yaxley-Lennon lead back to Luton, or what do you think he's going to do in the future?
I don't think they really move to Luton. He's bigger than Luton in many ways now. He does come back here. He will occasionally come back and tell the tales of the war stories of old, as it were.
Yeah.
He'll bring people here. You know, if it's a media company, he'll walk around with them, tell them of what's happened. And it can pretty guarantee people know him in the town. If he appears, they will oppose him. And there will be something of a standoff, and he's got a story.
Yeah.
Because the story has just been repeated.
Yes. And then to conclude, Peter, after all of the years you've spent in this world of trying to bridge divides, trying to kind of build bridges between different religious communities, different ethnic communities, what have you learned in all of the work you've done? What's been the most effective tool in your arsenal? Is it just sitting down and talking?
Sitting down, talking, enjoying good food,
Yes.
enjoying friendship. I have some of my best friends are people I've worked with closely over 15 years now, opposing the extremism. So I go to an iftar, was one yesterday, I sat down with people I've known and worked with for 15 years. They're personal friends. You know, I ask about their families, they ask about mine. We know each other as residents, as neighbours, as colleagues, as friends.
The interesting thing about somebody like Peter Adams is I can just imagine Tommy Robinson's supporters saying, well, Peter Adams, he's part of the problem. He's spent his career cozying up to Islamic extremists. That's how this kind of Muslim radicalisation happens in Luton. And my counter-narrative to that would be to say, well, no, actually, he's tried to do the opposite. There's an irony here because both Tommy Robinson and Peter Adams want to eradicate Islamic extremism from Luton and beyond. The thing is, they've both done it in a different way, because while he claims that Robinson has inflamed the tensions, what Peter spent decades doing is try to calm them by bringing communities together. And I do think it's interesting, and I noticed this when I was in Luton. I grew up next to Luton. I grew up in the town next door, and throughout my childhood, you'd hear tales of racial tensions there. And when I went to visit, people are rubbing up against each other pretty happily. I mean, there was quite a visible police presence in the town. Maybe that's part and parcel of how Luton has had to cope with different communities sometimes having problems with each other. But the point is, where we are now in comparison to where we were back in 2009 is just poles apart. And it does lend itself to the theory that actually, in order to settle tensions, you don't stoke them, you actually grasp the nettle, get people together. Afterwards, I actually said to Peter, what has happened to some of those Islamic extremists that would be associated with the likes of Anjem Choudhury? Interestingly, they're not in Luton anymore. Quite a few of them have gone back to Syria. In order to do a podcast like this, trying to seek out answers to the question, who is the real Tommy Robinson? Obviously, you do have to go to people that actually know him. There's a lot of dialogue online among people that have never even met the bloke. So I spoke to a woman who was in Tommy Robinson's inner circle for 2 years about why he's been repopularised, whether he really is a hero or a villain, and why she ended up falling out with him. Lucy Brown is a former associate of Tommy Robinson. She worked with him as a videographer and his assistant from 2017 when he was hired by the Canadian right-wing media website Rebel Media. They later had a very public spat following a protest in Whitehall that led to police clashing with protesters. After quitting the job, Lucy Brown received constant death threats and abuse from his followers. She told me what Tommy Robinson was really like to work with.
I get backlash even now, 7 years later. Like, I live with the Tommy Robinson, I don't know what to call it, shadow, and it's one of those things where you can't, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like,
Yeah.
if you try and say things which are fair, which is that, you could say that he was one of the first people it was a street movement, there was a working class reaction to what we now know as the horrific grooming scandal. They were the first people to deal with those probably issues on the ground. They were the ones seeing the effects on the victims, the police, not helping, all that kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, now you've got this kind of Frankenstein's monster of these mismatched, all these stories that have become mythologized. And you've got a man who is in prison because of his own mistakes, his own doing, ironically in prison for lying. He lied about a Syrian child. He had every opportunity to go to court and prove if what he was saying was true, and he couldn't. If you read the court files, it's very open and shut. Like, he wasn't able to prove his stance, and he
pleaded guilty to breaching 10 aspects of that High Court order.
He's done this a lot, breaking court orders, and it's just not the first time. He's always in contempt, And again, this is someone who nearly collapsed a couple of grooming trials as well. And so there's two Tommy Robinsons, is what I'm trying to say. There's two kind of people fighting in the same man, and on the online space where, the truth gets, a lie gets around the world.
Yeah. Before the truth
gets its trousers on. Yeah. And now you've got Elon Musk tweeting free Tommy Robinson. And I've got this horrible, unique perspective where I know that there is a person in there that genuinely cares, or perhaps did at one point. I'm not sure if that's the person that we're seeing now, because I know that you've been stung by him, and it's like, well, yeah, imagine that. Imagine being in his circle and then being expunged and completely thrown to the wolves.
Well, take me back to the beginning then. I mean, how did you get involved in the first place? And surely because of his reputation, you entered into it with a degree of trepidation, I'd imagine.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm writing about this at the moment, so it's kind of fresh in my memory, which is I'm trying to delve into that memory palace. But it was to do with the people around me in my fashion retouching company that I was working in Dalston. I was very much just left-wing liberal hipster. I did not belong in that world whatsoever. But there was a culture war happening. There were signs around of, why can't we talk about this? Is Trump that race? Is he? There's this kind of pushback from my colleagues and friends. Well, don't say that because, you're racist. And I was like, well, hang on. And it was just this thing that we're seeing now everywhere, where people would start by asking quite tepid questions, and then they would get accused of something really disgusting, like racism. So that was causing me to, I'm quite rebellious anyway, so I was kind of reacting to that. I was going online. I was like, well, if I'm supposed to hate these people so much, these hate-filled, radicalizing people like Alex Jones or whoever, I'm going to watch them and I'm going to see how hateful they really are and know why I hate them, I suppose, was my logic.
Like an education in what you're being told.
So I came into it when it was people like Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McGuinness, Lauren Southern, and that kind of era of what we now know as the culture war. And I was like, some of the stuff these people are saying is like quite sensible and not very radicalizing at all. It's just kind of like, yeah, we shouldn't have terrorism. Terrorism's bad, or, you know, just kind of basic stuff. And, you know, I joined a couple of left-wing groups, kind of as you do, I guess. And I saw racism and sexism in those groups. I saw violence. I saw, you know, the sort of far left violence was very normalised. And I was like, well, hang on a second. I thought this lot were violent. You guys are encouraging, you know, smashing people in the face because you disagree with them. That's pretty extreme to me.
Yeah.
So I saw things backwards. I started being like, I think we're being sold a lie here. And I think these people are less hateful. And I think actually this team is way more hateful than they're making out to be. And then I just met this gay couple that were going out and asking feminist basic questions at the Trump march, you know, in London and stuff. And we met, got on really well. And they just so happened to be interviewing Tommy the next week or something for their YouTube channel. And they were interested in this dichotomy as well. They were like, maybe this guy had something to say that we've been told he's more evil than he is. And we were just starting to see kind of Islamic extremism becoming more of an issue as well. And again, I just think because the media were very much like nothing to see here, it gave him, people were looking at him with different eyes and saying, well, he's been saying this for ages. I believed what the telly told me about him, but now he's starting to make more sense. And we all met, and it's just weird. We just got along. It was very, very strange. I was very surprised as well.
Yeah. But I mean, if you look at somebody who founded the English Defence League back in the late noughties, somebody who was once a member of the British National Party, somebody whose rhetoric, particularly about Muslims, is pretty toxic, then we've got into the space now where if you do accuse him of being far right, if you do suggest that he might be a racist and a white supremacist, all hell breaks loose. But I mean, is it unfair and unduly pejorative to use those terms about him?
Yeah, white supremacist doesn't make sense because he's a multiculturalist. He's like an old civic nationalist. He basically doesn't care what colour someone is. He just wants their ideas to be good. That's
but he wants the British indigenous public to reign supreme. He doesn't want what he describes as an Islamification of Great Britain to take place. And therefore that's a degree of supremacy of, I would say, kind of like, I don't know, Judo-Christianity over Islam.
Well, yeah, if he thinks that's better, then I don't know if that's necessarily like a supremacy. I mean, you could say that there are people that think Britain should be Islamic. Is that their Islamic supremacy?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah, no, maybe it is. And then if people would say, "Oh, Tommy Robinson, he's a racist."
There's racism everywhere, and you see it everywhere with different races. That's the thing. So yeah, Tommy, I would say him going after the Syrian kid in court, I would say that was a bit racist because it was like, oh, he's a Syrian. Like, I would say there's little elements of that. I would say some of the tweeting and stuff. I'm like, yes, I would say. But then again, I would say, well, probably I say some stuff that is. Probably the person next to me in the shop that's got brown skin might say the same about other people with white skin. It's just one of those things where you kind of get past it and you're like, how do we tell who's the most racist? I think that's the other problem is we point the finger at people like that. We say they're racist, which means we're not. And I don't know if that's the best way of thinking about it.
So you work up close and personal with him for how long altogether, Lucy?
Only about a year and a half, 2 years.
How close did you get to him in a friendip or other sense, professional sense?
We almost lived in a car. It was like living in a van, like being on the road, as a team. We called it the mystery machine, but really close. I mean, staying in hotels together, getting drunk, going to events where he would get a hero's welcome, and marches and things like that, and going abroad, going across Europe and everything.
And what were your lefty mates, so to speak, saying about all this? Or any of your friends or family? Were they raising concerns?
Yes. Well, my family, I think, still are just like, don't talk about us, we don't exist. My parents, I think, were just like, it's just another one of her phases because she's always been weird. My lefty friends, ironically, my mate who is not white had to argue with his mate who's very white about whether or not I'm a racist, and like there's just a lot of weirdness going on. I did lose some friends. It was very, very hard. But then again, that's what I did sign up for. I knew that would happen.
But what were you signing up for? For a championing of some kind of truth?
I was really worried about what I saw as really extreme toxic misogyny coming from the Islamic faith. Like I saw it as inherently misogynistic and actually violent to women, especially in terms of like the Manchester bombings, the grooming gangs. And I was like, there's something that we need to talk about here that the feminists should be. And again, I joined a feminist group. Yeah. And they didn't seem interested.
And how was he on a kind of one-to-one basis? What's he actually like?
It pains me to say this because there is like I said, I look back at the past and I see there was a bit of camaraderie. We got on. It was fun. But now I see, he's very attacking. Once you're out of his limelight, that's it. Like once you've been banished, you are evil incarnate. So I'm now in the evil box. But when we were working together, we got on quite well. We were all joking amongst each other. It was like posh girl, gay couple, and Tommy Robinson. Like who would put that together? But we were getting on. I think we kind of liked the fact that we're all different. We take the mick out of each other. There was like the class divide that we, and there was lots of surprising things about him. One of our friends that was in the free speech scene was trans. He did an interview with them, didn't give a toss. It's just there was a lot of surprising things.
What of his intellect? Because we have this discussion that takes place quite recently between Jordan Peterson and Urza Levant, who is the owner of Rebel News, which provided a platform for Tommy Robinson, sort of talking about his genius and he's misunderstood, and just because he's working class doesn't mean he's stupid.
He's smart in the sense of he has sort of like street smarts. In terms of long-term thinking, I think he makes a lot of stupid mistakes. I think that again his court case, perfect example. If he'd have waited five minutes, fact-checked some things, he wouldn't be in court and prison right now. He's made a lot of stupid mistakes, but then if you think about the way of building a brand, building a kind of understanding what people want, he's obviously had a lot of time on the ground in movements with, sort of managing large firms of men and people. So he understands the game, as it were. He understands like what people want from him. He understands what he's selling. He understands what people need, and people need that hero image. And I think he provides that.
I mean, is that what is motivating him? A degree of notoriety, fame, public adulation?
I don't think at first. I think at first it was like, and I would say the same thing. It's this idea of I don't want to tell my children I did nothing, and I think that's the thing that that caused me to think actually maybe this guy's okay, because I feel the same way, and I don't like the idea of my country becoming more dangerous and me doing nothing. And I think a lot of his fans would say that. So that's like the sort of the nicer side. But then on the other side, you've got just things going to his head, I think, and believing the hype. And I don't think it's just him. I think a lot of these characters eventually believe their own hype. And people send them pictures of them as like, of like Joan of Arc and Richard the Lionheart, and people saying he should be prime minister all the time, and saying like should be king of England, and just this myth, like this almost fairy tale thing. But every time they open their phone, there's millions of people saying it, and then getting letters and fan mail and people saying you've changed my life and all this kind of stuff. So it will have an effect. And it's like being famous but without the training of being famous. So he has no PR team, he doesn't have people to ground him, he doesn't have people to like prep him and say, which is what we were trying to do, right, like here's how to make your message a bit more palatable, and but he won't be managed, so he's quite stubborn.
How did the relationship fail, and why?
Frankly, he needed me out the way. I won't go into it, but I was thrown under the bus, and I was accused of something I didn't do. I was accused of inviting someone to an event that I didn't invite, but it was convenient, and I needed to be fired. And
why did you need to be fired?
I was an easy target, and I needed to go. And I think that's the truth that I didn't really want to say for a long time, because it's like unpleasant. His fans have been after me. This rumour mill just exploded, and I became like persona non grata for a very long time. I now have CPSD from it, and like, what do you do after that? Can't go back to a normal job. and like you can't go into a right-wingy job because you're a Judas. So I've just been in this kind of limbo for a while. So it became very, very nasty very quickly, and I've had this kind of whiplash of 1 minute being, oh my God, you're Tommy's assistant, and you're, oh, but you're posh, but you're all right, you know, and you're one of us, and like wanting to help give a voice to people that I felt deserved it, you know, especially working class communities. And overnight I became, you're a Judas, you're a snake, you're evil, you betrayed Tommy, you betrayed us, and it just was very confusing, and I didn't know how to handle it. And I just kind of went away. You know, I tried to bounce around, ended up joining some more like to the right sort of movements who were like, oh, come and be friends with us. You know, just mentally was shot, and then kind of just went away, and now I'm just writing about it and I'm not like part of any group, which I think is fine. I think it's fine to not be part of a group, but I am on Twitter and I advocate for certain things. But anyone's like, oh, come and join. I'm like, no.
Don't join anyone.
Fine, thanks.
But do you reflect on it with a huge amount of regret now?
A little bit, but but you can't, because it's like life, isn't it? You can't go back. So, but I think there's a misconception. It's not that I necessarily hate Tommy Robinson per se, and I do still think people just don't have the facts, and you can't be angry at people for not knowing what they don't know. And they really like this idea. Elon Musk doesn't know, does he? He lives in America, so he's just got this idea. And
but
Tommy,
what are the facts? What facts are you saying that people are ignoring?
Well, the facts are that that this is a flawed man that operates like a gangster. When you fall out of his good books, he will silence you. So, you know, like journalist Lizzie did, and turned up at her house at 3 a.m.
There's an irony there, by the way, to silence your enemy when you're meant to be a freedom of speech champion.
You know, also including the victims of Andrew Tate, who he's called liars. And I'm just like, okay, right.
Well, that's an interesting one to explore, isn't it? On one hand, one has to ask oneself whether he would have been so vocal on the rape gangs if the perpetrators weren't largely Pakistani origin Muslim men. Question one. Question two, if you're actually worried about women's safety, and indeed, in a way, children's safeguarding in the case of the rape gangs attacking women who were in their teens, you would then have to absolutely separate yourself from Andrew Tate, who admittedly is under investigation and denies the allegations against him, but this is somebody who's been associated with, by his own admission, misogyny, been accused of rape, other sexual offences, trafficking of women. That's a difficult one, isn't it?
We both had spoken about Andrew Tate before, and he didn't want him anywhere near his event or his brand or anything like that. And something changed clearly after sort of COVID, when Andrew Tate took off. And I just think that's as big of a sign as that. I mean, not only has he been calling his victims lies, he's been cheerleading him. He's been saying free Top G, my son loves him, he's great, he's funny, he's amazing. And to me, I'm just like, okay, so it's money then? It is money and fame. It might not have been once. You know, maybe once it was genuine and you wanted to stop the grooming gangs. But now you cannot promote Andrew Tate and say that you're against grooming gangs. It's just impossible to me. It's very revealing. He lost 25% of his audience, Tommy said, because he came out in support of Tate, but he doubled down.
Yeah. Having said that, in this kind of working class hero aura that he's tried to create around himself, is there something to be said in the same way that you could say that there are some young men that support Tate because they feel that they're underrepresented in society? And by the way, this isn't a justification for Tate's misogyny, it's just an explanation. In a similar vein, one does get the impression, particularly, for instance, during the Southport riots, that there are some working class people out there that don't feel they're being listened to, that think they're the victims of a two-tier justice system. We can look at the situation, for instance, let's give a little example now of the grandmother who, okay, she did incite violence with her Facebook post about the riots. She ends up in prison for a number of months. Conversely, we've got the former Labour MP Mike Amesbury given a suspended sentence for punching a constituent in the face. If you're a working class person, maybe you do quite like the cut of Tommy Robinson's jib when it comes to the establishment. That includes the government, the media. You know, we're the baddies, we're not telling the truth. That's a narrative that probably is quite attractive to some swathes of the population.
Well, it's a narrative that I think is I agree with. I mean, a lot of stuff that Tate says, I'm like, yeah, we all think that. Well, I think most of it's common sense. A lot of what Tommy says is kind of just common sense, I think. And I think there is a bit of two-tier going on, like, sure. I mean, you could also say that Tommy's a bit two-tier as well. But I do think, yeah, absolutely, the demonisation of the working class and this vacuum of people feeling that they don't have representation, like, yeah, absolutely. I think that's where people like Tate and Tommy are born. And unfortunately, you've now got this kind of boy who cried wolf scenario where the media are actually the ones telling the truth and the facts about people like Tate, but no one listens to them because the media are the enemy, like you said, the Matrix. And it's very upsetting and annoying because there was just a moment there where maybe they were on the right path and maybe they were trying to say something and maybe it would have been good, but now it's just become this monster. And now you've got young men getting radicalised. You know, you had Kyle Clifford the other day, that horrible murder. And
murders, yeah, the crossbow killing of the Hunt family.
And assault. And then you've got, you had Darren Osborne. I'm not saying it's like any better or worse than Islamic terrorism. I'm just saying it's also a problem and you can't just brush it under the rug because they're people that you like online. I think that's a problem because it's exactly what you're saying that the Muslim community do, which has nothing to do with us. Every time someone comes along and commits like a horrible crime, not in your name, but after watching your stuff.
I mean, I suppose you'd get... We've had moderate Muslims in this very Daily Tea studio saying, look, we don't want the Islamic extremists in our midst any more than you do. But their voices are increasingly drowned out, unfortunately. To conclude on that point that I started on about this argument that he is actually a political prisoner and in many respects he's been treated more harshly than somebody else. What's your reaction to that?
No, it sounds like he's being protected. I mean, like you say, he pled guilty. He knew he was going to prison because there's videos of him saying, I know I'm going to prison. I'm going to release this video anyway. I think he's safer in solitary than if he was in the normal bit because he's been, what do they call it in general? He's been in the main bit of prison before and he nearly got sugar watered, you know, boiling water and sugar. He nearly had that happen to him. So he doesn't want to be in that bit. I think it's a victim narrative. I'm sorry, but this is all saying a man that continued to break the law, chose to break the law, chose to go to prison. And now you've got these people that are making money off and around him, trying to keep his name in the press by making him into the victim. The victim in that case was the Hijazi family. The Hijazi family.
Yeah,
and perhaps
that's the name of the Syrian refugee.
Exactly. And now there's a documentary calling their son a liar that's been seen 50-something million times and been retweeted by Elon Musk.
Yeah, I mean, the frustration for me in the mainstream media is we are then accused of being a part of a conspiracy because we do not want to air or give credence to defamatory claims. We can't give credence to defamatory claims because the clue is in the word defamatory. We're not there to repeat libels, and that's the way the mainstream media works. We work according to regulation and indeed the letter of the law. But Lucy, what next for you? Because, you know, you're saying here, do you feel you're going to forever be tainted by your association with Tommy Robinson? I mean, what I know you're writing this book. What next for you?
Well, I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see what happens with it. I mean, it's like trying to make sense of it myself, to be honest with you. And like I said, there are mixed memories there, and I think there was a nice person there, and I'm fascinated. But I can't. Not only can I not really escape it, like it's just tied to my name, and you know, he says things like, "Oh, it's pathetic. All she can do is talk about me." Well, it's like, well, yeah, I can't. Like, what else am I supposed to do? I keep getting asked about you. But I'm going to write this thing. I'm going to just let people have a think about who they're worshipping. Maybe send a copy to Elon Musk. Who knows? But you can't escape him anyway. I mean, even if I wasn't me, I go outside my house, there's Stop Tommy Robinson posters. Tommy and people like him, they say things that sometimes need to be said. They're unpleasant, but we need to have conversations. And, you know, you can't just say, oh, let's ban everything forever. I think that's where they come from. You can't just say, oh, let's like stop people using these words and, you know, like put all these restrictions in. The fact is more conversations gets rid of people like Tommy Robinson. More like open dialogue. I think there needs to be a popping of the myth. I'm sorry, but we need to have a bit of reality, and I really do wish that he didn't suck these conversations in and make it about him, because these are conversations we need to have. So I think people should know a bit of the truth about him. He's not a journalist. He's a very naughty boy. as they say.
On that note, Lucy Brown, thank you very much indeed for joining me on the Daily Tea.
Thank you for having me.
What I found so interesting about speaking to both Peter Adams and Lucy Brown is, as is ever the case with these sorts of characters, it is quite complicated and it is quite complex, and headlines certainly don't tell the full story. There are many who just want to say that Tommy Robinson is a racist, he's an extremist that shouldn't have a platform at all, and that he deserves everything he gets in prison because he's a convicted criminal. And I think that's a perfectly cogent position to take. I think it also behoves journalists to have a look at the claims that he is a political prisoner, that he is being treated differently because of how outspoken he has been about the Pakistani rape gangs and other issues. I've had constant to's and fro's with people about Tommy Robinson. I've described him on television and in pieces that I've written in very derogatory and disparaging terms, because from my perspective, and I think this was reflected in the interview with Lucy Brown, I've always wondered to myself whether Tommy Robinson would have taken such an interest in the rape gangs if the perpetrators weren't Pakistani. That point she makes about his now support for Andrew Tate doesn't really sit well with him proclaiming to be this sort of self-styled champion of working class women. I've similar suspicions about his support for Israel, because you could also argue that would he be supporting Israel so vociferously if Israel's opponents weren't Muslims? And that's where the problem lies. You know, is Tommy Robinson really a friend of women? I'm not really sure. I don't think so. Is Tommy Robinson really a friend of the Jews? I think the jury's out on that too. Is Tommy Robinson somebody who is self-promoting, probably ultimately for his own gain? And I mean financial, fame and otherwise, very probably. So while as a journalist I will always argue that the freedom of speech case should be heard, and actually the one thing I have changed my mind on when it comes to Tommy Robinson, I had previously argued, in fact I had this debate with Jordan Peterson himself last summer, I questioned the wisdom of him interviewing Tommy Robinson, and I discussed that in the studio with Kamal and Piers Morgan. And Piers Morgan made the very valid point that Elon Musk can just platform Tommy Robinson without questioning at all what he stands for, the claims for and against him, and his motivations. Actually, to really get under the skin of who Tommy Robinson is and challenge some of his views, it does merit a proper journalistic interrogation. So I've changed my mind, because I'd previously say he's not somebody that anyone should interview. And now I think the real way to put what he believes and what he stands for and some of his defence of his own behaviour to the test is to actually ask him some straight questions. I hope this podcast has gone some way to giving a nuanced view of who he is. But I think when it comes to the hero or villain question, I very much consider him to be in the latter category.